Hey all, welcome back. So, this is our day 4, and I hope that it's interesting. So, let's begin with random module. Before knowing what is random module, in Python, I will ask what means random. In nature and in our daily life, it's really easy to create a randomness. If you splash some paint in the canvas, that's gonna be pretty random. And if you take at the TV static from the analog TVs, but when we are talking about computers, then these machines are what we could call deterministic. They will perform repeatable actions in a fully predictable way. We talked a lot about randomness, but let's see it in action. Let's write some code and produce some random numbers. For you to work, I have given the link in the description. Click the link and fork the rebel. So, we know that we want to get hold of some random numbers. So how can we get random numbers? When we want to generate random numbers, because this is such frequently needed functionality, the Python team have already created a random module. So if you head over to askpython.com and search for the Python random module, then you will able to see the documentation for this random module, and you can see that it contains a whole bunch of functions that you can use that allows you to generate random integers, so random whole numbers or random floating point numbers. So let's see how can we tap into this random module. In order to tap into the random module, we first have to import it. So we write import random. Let's say that we want to create a random integer and we use the same code that we say random. That's tapping into this module here, randint, and then we get add a set of brackets and then we specify the start and the end. So this is basically a range of numbers that we are specifying any integer between 1 and 10. And now we can go ahead and print out a random integer just like this, and every single time I run it, you will notice that I will get a different number or maybe sometimes the same, but it's a random number between the range that I have specified. That the random module is a Python module. So what exactly is a module? Well, you have seen that we have mostly been writing our code all on the same page in a sort of script style, right? And everything just kind of gets executed from top to bottom. But sometimes your code will get so long because you are trying to create something complicated and it's no longer possible to understand what's going on in such a large piece of code. What people will do in that case is to split the code up into individual modules where each module is responsible for different bit of functionality of your program. And if you have a complex project with many modules, then you could have collaboration on your project, right? Lots of people could be working on it, each person working on different thing. Say if a factory was building a car, it wouldn't make sense for one person to build the entire car from wheels, axle to chassis. That's crazy. Instead, you have different people working on different modules like the tire module, on the chassis module or the engine module. And then once they put everything together, you end up with the final car, on in our case the final program. So we know that the random module is a module that the Python team created to make it easier for us to generate our random numbers without needing to get into the complexities of all of the math that's required to generate pseudo random numbers. Next, we have seen how we can create random whole numbers. But what if I wanted to create a random floating number? Well, all I have to do is use the random module that contains the random function and it will return a random floating point number between 0 and 1. But it's really important to note that in this case, it doesn't actually include 1. So it goes up to like 0.9999 but not including 1. Let's try it out. Try it out. So we will say random underscore float is equal to random dot random and that a set of brackets. And this will give me output some sort of number in the interval between 0 and 1 but not including 1. So let's go ahead and print. Let's see if it works. First, it prints a random integer between 1 and 10. Then, we print our random float between 0 and 1. And every time we run the code, you will notice that we get different random numbers. So next is something which is really important and you are going to use many times in the future. And this is the concept of the Python list. And the list is what you would call a data structure. What does that mean? Well, it's just a way of organizing and storing single pieces of data, and that was called a variable, right? If you guys are not familiar with variables, watch out my previous video. I have clearly explained about it. Now, just go through an example. A is equal to 3, B is equal to hello. But that's just storing one piece of data, right? Be it a number or a string. But sometimes you might want to store grouped pieces of data. Data that has some sort of connection with each other. For example, if you wanted to store all of the names of the Emirates and the UAE, then it doesn't really make sense to store them all individually because they belong together, right? They have a relationship to each other. So it would be a nice if you had a variable that was called Emirates and UAE, and then you would be able to store all of the names of the Emirates together in one variable. Now, in other cases, you might also want to have order in your data. So, for example, if you were storing all of the people in a virtual queue, then you want to be able to keep hold of the order in which they join the queue. You don't want to let the last person somehow skip the queue because you don't have a good data structure, right? This is why we need to learn about lists. And a list looks pretty simple. It's just a set of square brackets with many items stored inside. And those items can be any data type. We have to be careful with its syntax. In Python, lists always start with an open square bracket like this and a closing square bracket like this. And then in between you have your items separated by a comma. So pretty simple. In order to store it inside the variable, then it's the same way as we have done before. The only difference is the right hand side of the equal sign. This is the list data structure. If we store a bunch of fruits, for example, then it might look something like this: cherry, apple, pear, separated by a comma inside the set of square brackets. Now, let's say that I wanted to store all of the names of the Emirates of UAE. Previously, without knowing about this list data structure, we might have written Emirate 1 is equal to Abu Dhabi, Emirate 2 is equal to Dubai, and so on and so forth, and we could create as many variables as we have states. But now that we know that about list, then we can just create a single variable and we call it Emirates of UAE. And now we can create a list by creating a set of square brackets, and inside those square brackets we add our items. So again the first item is the states of Abu Dhabi, which is going to be a string, and then we have got Dubai, etc. And we can continue this list just by adding commas, adding a piece of data, adding another comma, adding piece of data. And this way we end up with a list data structure. You can use a list to store many pieces of related data, but they also have an order. So this is the first piece of data. This is the second piece of data. Here's a list of Emirates of UAE ordered by the dates that they joined the union. I decided that I wanted to know which was the state that joined first. Then I can print this variable state Emirates of UAE. I can add a set of square brackets and then I type 0 as the index of the piece of data I want to pull out from my Emirates of UAE list. So if I print, we can see Abu Dhabi, and if I keep increasing the number, you can see that it's going through my list in the order that it was saved. And you might have thinking that when I type 0, I got the first place of data, right? It's because the programmers always start counting from 0. And if I type 2 instead of 0, we will get Sharjah, yeah? Now, in addition to use the positive index like 0, 1, 2, we can also use a negative index. So if I wrote -1 or -2, then it actually starts counting from the end of the list. So if I wrote Emirates of UAE square bracket inside that -1, then I will get Fujairah as the input. Yeah, done with that too. And you could also add to the list if you wanted to. So for example, if you wanted to add an item at the end of the list, how do we add that? Well, we can write the name of the list and then we use a function called append. And append will add a single item to the end of the list. So let's say the Sheikh Land is joining the Emirates of UAE. So now, once I have appended Sheikh Land to the end of my Emirates of UAE list and I print out the Emirates of UAE, you can see there is added at the end. So that's it, and I hope that you got an overall idea about a list in Python. Now, when you are working with list, one of the most common error you will come across is something called the index out of range error. What does it mean though? Well, let's take all the Emirates of UAE, and you might remember that there are 7 Emirates in UAE. But if you don't remember, don't worry. It's easy as writing len and then passing over the Emirates of UAE, which will print 7. So now we know that there are a total of 7 items in this list, and remember, because we start counting from 0, Fujairah is actually at index 6. So if we print Emirates of UAE and then we try to get the item at the 6th, we hit print, you will see that we get Fujairah printed. Now, what if we went one beyond that? What if we tried to get the one at index 7, somewhere out here. What do you what do we get instead? Well, we get an error. It's called an index error, but very frequently you might end up with a situation where you have some sort of value saying num of Emirates is equal to len, and then we pass over the Emirates of UAE. So this is going to be equal to 7, and then we pass that inside here as a index num of Emirates, and then we hit run and we get the same error, right? Where we try to get hold of this index in this list. It's again list index out of range, and this is an off by 1 error because all we need to do is just simply minus 1, so that 1 becomes 0, 7 becomes 6, and then we get rid of that error. Now, it might be easier if we work with something a little bit simpler. So, let's create a list of the dirty dozen, but you will notice that some of these are fruits like strawberries, apple, and others are vegetables. So, how can we use our list to still keep them inside the same sort of container, the dirty dozen, but somehow separate them out into fruits and vegetables? Well, we could just simply create two lists, fruits and vegetables, but these two kind of have a relationship, right? That's kind of related because they are all on the list of the high pesticide foods. So, how can we have list within a list? Well, that's what called a nested list. Instead of our original dirty dozen, we could create a new list called dirty underscore dozen, and we set it equal to a list that contains two lists. It contains fruits and vegetables. So now what effectively has happened is we have inserted this list inside here, and then we have listed this list inside here. So now we have a list that contains two lists. So that's it, and today we have learned about randomness, Python list, index errors, and nested list. So consider subscribing for more videos, join our WhatsApp community and Instagram. I have given the link in the description. So until the next video, take care and bye bye.